Okay.
Hi, I'm Bob Mayer, professor in the Core. Today, stop that. I'm going to talk to you a bit about what I do in my classes to annoy my students and hopefully elucidate some good responses in integrating pop culture with pretty much everything we do in our core courses. I'm going to focus on Core 110, Core 120, because this is where I've most developed what I've done, but it's also useful in Core 220 and pretty much everything else. One of the things I think we have to get over is this idea that only high culture is actually relevant to anything. I think that's not true. I've done a lot of work in pop culture, and I find that pretty much everything you need to know about anything you can find in rock and roll, and bad movies, and even worse, television. Because these are reflections of the societies that create them and in fact resonate deeply with us in ways that, okay, let's face it, I love Plato, I love Shakespeare too, I love Joyce, but sometimes Simpsons works better. So let's take a look at some of the things that I do, and you can decide whether you want to try that yourself. You know, take SpongeBob here, one of my buddies, right? If you're talking about modernism, you're talking about Dadaism, you're talking about surrealism, what's better than Bikini Bottom? Students get it. They can see this in a way that they can't, stop that, in ways that they probably wouldn't get necessarily just by looking at Picasso. And talking about global cultures and global aesthetics, what's more of an example of kind of cross-cultural aesthetic melding than my friend Pikachu? It means something different in Japan to something different in America, but to everybody it means something. Pikachu, this unholy hybrid of rabbit and God knows what else, has become sort of a symbol of a gaming culture, but also an aesthetic culture that transcends racial and cultural boundaries. Now, what I do formally in classes to sort of bring this together is oftentimes I focus on music. For instance, let's take an example from Core 110. Literature and psychology. I'm mixing together some stuff, different stories, and in this case I think we're looking at Edgar Allan Poe and Cask of Amontillado, but also looking at actually Kohlburg's study of moral development, theory of moral development, in the Hawk book, 40 Studies That Change Psychology. Now, students like this, they get this, but what I do is pair it with something a little bit more contemporary. In this case, the song Teenagers by My Chemical Romance, which, as you see, has a lot of relevance for students who wear hoodies and are somewhat emo in their outlook. It's a song about teenagers scaring the living, well, you can listen to the lyrics. Teenagers are very scary. Why are they scary? Because they're likely to kill you. Why are they likely to kill you? Because they're teenagers. Well, how does this resonate? Well, Kohlburg tells us exactly why the teenagers are trying to kill you. It's because of the stages of moral development. And when the students see this and they get involved in this, particularly with music that many of them have heard and oftentimes like, they start to go, one of those moments where they get very disturbed because suddenly what they thought was mindless amusement is actually philosophically and academically valuable. This terrorizes them, and that in and of itself is certainly a good thing to have happen. In a way that I think contributes to classroom discussion. My goodness, those people are strange, aren't they? Another way of doing this is, for instance, Core 120. When you're dealing with Plato, Plato's a pretty deep subject. Plato's got lots of great stuff in Republic. We go through a lot of the different things, the Ring of Gyges, Allegory of the Cave, Myth of the Metals. It's hard to grasp. Students don't necessarily get the dialogues, they don't get the sort of elenchus that Socrates is using there, but it's important stuff. So one of the ways that I like to integrate these things is to go through stuff like, again, pop culture. You can use The Matrix, for instance, when you're dealing with the Allegory of the Cave, because actually the Wachowski brothers just ripped it off anyway, straight from Plato. But also you can use music, and one of the things that I found, one of the songs that really sort of resonates with people when we're talking about the Allegory of the Cave is, of course, Stairway to Heaven. Now this clip I show them is from The Song Remains the Same, which is not really that good without drugs, but we do the best we can. Stairway to Heaven tells the story of somebody coming out of darkness into light. or about somebody using lots of drugs. We're not quite sure. Either way, it fits very well with Plato's allegory in talking about the nature of reality, the nature of truth, the nature of beauty, and the nature of choices and responsibility. So the song forms an arc that you can link to Plato's story in a way that I think the students find amusing and interesting, if not necessarily totally mind-blowing. At least gets them to think about it. It also gets them to watch some really good music. And this in itself is a public service, I'm pretty sure. I think we'll just leave that alone there for right now. We've all heard the song. Essentially, one of the things to do with integrating music or any other pop culture into class is to sort of systematize it. What I've done in Canvas is create an entire list of, for instance, songs. And they're all collected with their lyrics. I can show you what I mean. For instance, with here, for My Chemical Romance, I would have the album cover, I would have links to where you could find the music, I have links to where the citations for where the art comes from, and then the lyrics and citations to that. And I have dozens and dozens and dozens of these. And so I can pull them out and mix and match them with whatever I want to. So, for instance, when we're talking about Skinner or Pavlov and we're talking about conditioning, I can slap up Metallica's Master of Puppets or Mr. Brownstone from Guns N' Roses. Actually, most of my songs have a lot to do with addiction, because I think that pretty much everything we talk about in Concepts of Self has some way to do with addiction or addictive behavior. It's actually a very strange course. But by having it all systematized and organized, I can mix and match as I need to. And I have this done for both Core 110 and Core 120. For Core 220, for aesthetic expressions, I've found that pop culture also works very well. In fact, one of the things that I've done in the last 2 times I've taught it is lead off with a discussion of the aesthetics of Apple. Apple is a company that most of our students are very familiar with, as most of them are sitting around with either iPhones or Macintoshes or iPads or iPods. I have them read an article about the aesthetics of Apple, a rather critical article. We watched the 1984 video from the Super Bowl, which basically, the commercial, which positioned Apple as the new kid on the block, the sort of revolutionary, smashing the IBM facade and establishing this brave new world of freedom and originality. We then shift to the article, which talks about how Apple's modern design aesthetic has in effect become fascistic and de-individualizing, and so that the company itself that started in 1984 with the Macintosh breaking down barriers has become the one to erect them, at least aesthetically and sort of philosophically. This works very well because then the students start to look at their iPhones with vague disgust and push them away for at least 5 minutes, then pick them up again, of course. The point is not to make a statement necessarily about Apple, but to show that the things in our daily lives have aesthetic value, and those aesthetic values are tied to professional, academic, and moral and ethical values as well. Also in Core 220, we look at Rites of Spring, Stravinsky. We look at modern dance, but we also look at Monty Python and the Holy Grail. We're talking about the aesthetic of witches, for instance. We'll look at the scene where the witch is put on trial in Monty Python. And we'll also look at the Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch of the West says she's going to come get you, my little pretty, and your little dog too. Although, interestingly enough, the students now refer to Wicked more than they do to the Wizard of Oz. They are all very quick to defend the Wicked Witch because they point out her traumatic upbringing and her childhood and the psychological pressure she was under. And Dorothy's not really a very pleasant figure in their minds. We can leverage that. We can take that and talk about how the different aesthetics, for instance, of Glinda and the Wicked Witch have changed over the years, and how Wicked, the play, has transformed that concept. It's the way that aesthetics gets worked into popular culture, but also into sort of popular conceptions of morality and motivation. I don't think there's any real limit to what you can do with popular culture in our curriculum. I've used Kelly's Heroes and given papers on that. I've also used Melville, Moby Dick, which in a sense was popular culture for the 1850s. That's another thing to remember. Shakespeare was popular culture once too. And the people who showed up to watch Shakespeare's plays were not necessarily the ones in top hats and coats and fancy ruffled neck pieces and such. A lot of them were chewing on joints of meat and throwing stuff on the floor and getting wildly drunk and laughing at the fart jokes. There's no reason why we should exclude culture simply by its provenance. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can learn a lot about South Park when you're talking about the aesthetics of hell, for instance. The South Park movie has some really interesting insights that dovetail with my discussion of Dante and Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress in aesthetic expressions. The Simpsons has any number of episodes that will touch upon pretty much any theme you can possibly think of in the core. So my challenge, in a sense, to folks is to look around you and find those things that interest you, those things that you think are relevant to some idea or some concept that is also touched upon by our more academic readings. And I think you'll find that by melding popular culture with a lot of the stuff that we do in the core, you can have A, fun, B, a more engaging sort of class, and C, I think, help the students integrate different ways of thinking, different modes of thinking, different ways of analysis. Because at its best, popular culture is just that. It's culture of the populace. It gets into what we really fear, love, hate, think about, worry about, and it puts that and articulates that into ways that we find acceptable and meaningful. It's not a replacement for Alice Walker or for B.F. Skinner or for Plato or, John Locke. But it's a great way of helping us understand the ideas that these people have in ways that I think are both entertaining and effective. So that's my contribution to world knowledge for the day. Peace out.